Hello learners, I welcome you to this online session of coral reef formation. We have discussed what coral reefs are they animal, vegetable or minerals, or where do you see them? Are there any special conditions under which coral reefs grow? And we've also seen how there are different types of coral reefs which are forming. As I was just saying that there are three types: fringing reefs built around an island or a landmass. These are the easiest to explain. Barrier reefs are separated from land by a wide lagoon. Atolls have made scientists wonder the most regarding their origin. Why should rings of coral enclose a shallow and sheltered lagoon? Now, as I would like to discuss that these could be different stages of coral reef, coral island processing, or they could be standalone conditions for these coral reefs to origin. And there are, from quite a long time, as the seabed have been explored, there have been people, scientists, trying to understand why and how and what makes the coral reefs what they are. So, coral reefs are not wholly made up of corals. Many other calcareous organisms play important parts in their structure. Algae are found in reefs and have an important role in their existence. Besides, remains of mollusks and other shell creatures can be found on reefs. The interstices, or the space between the coralline masses, are filled by calcareous sediments. So, they form one chunky matter which are called reefs. Nevertheless, coral polyps are the dominant organism. Many scientists have attempted to explain the formation of coral reefs, especially in the 19th century. As information regarding the tropical islands had come in during the latter part of the age of discoveries, scientists have tried to understand the origin and existence of corals. The prominent one to bring in such information was Captain Cook from his 3 voyages. He had mapped the entire coastline of the Pacific in his 3 voyages, which he undertook in the 18th century. There were other explorers who saw these underwater reefs and wondered about them. But as yet, in the 18th century, nobody tried to understand or theorize or give explanations for the existence of corals. It was only in the 19th century that scholars theorized about the formation of reefs. Foremost among them was Charles Darwin, an English scholar, English botanist actually. Although he was not the first to speculate about the origin of reefs, Charles Darwin went around the world in his ship HMS Beagle. He had specially gone to the South Pacific Islands and took note of the coral islands there. Just to mention here that these were all post Captain Cook scholars and scientists who were trying to understand that Pacific is a huge water body. It's practically one hemisphere of our Earth, of our world. And since Captain Cook had mapped the shores of the Pacific, there were other scholars and scientists who tried to emulate and go along in his footsteps. So, Charles Darwin was one of them. His ship HMS Beagle, that is part of the system of British Isles, and he went to the South Pacific Ocean and took note of the coral islands there. You've done the different oceans of the world, and even in the South Pacific, there are these small island communities practically strewn all over, and practically it is about a little south of the equator, and they're all, or mostly they are, coral islands. In Darwin's time, very little was known about the depth and the floor of the ocean. So, here Darwin postulated his theory the first person to postulate or to try to understand or give explanation for the presence of these coral islands. In 1842, Darwin explained the creation of coral atolls in the southern Pacific Ocean. He based this upon observations made during a 5-year voyage aboard the HMS Beagle, that is from 1831 to 1836. He made this journey and observed and tried to understand the South Pacific Ocean coral islands. He put forward his theory in 1837 and later on modified in 1842. So, let us see what his theory is all about. So, in figure 5.2, we see a volcanic island. So, Darwin's theory starts with a volcanic island which becomes extinct, and there is subsidence. The island, after becoming extinct, it gradually is lowered by whichever process it is. We are going to come to it. So, around this island there is formation of fringing reef. The conditions of coral growth is in this area is according to the temperature, the fresh water, the material, that is the live corals must have to grow, sunlight, everything is, all these things were just the best possible condition for coral growth. So, there is a volcanic island, and because this is an area where the coral growth is possible, there is just adjacent to the island there is growth of reef called the fringing reef. So, that is why I was talking about the process in fringing and the next barrier and then the atolls. So, this is a stage according to Darwin. So, as the island and ocean floor subside, see, I began talking about Darwin's theory as a theory of subsidence. The extinct mountain or extinct volcanic mountain at the center gradually subsides. It could be due to the subsidence, could be due to the weight of the corals, it could be due to the erosion of the island itself, or it could be any other subaerial denudational processes. Coral growth builds a fringing reef, often including a shallow lagoon between the land and the main reef. As the subsidence continues, the fringing reef becomes a larger barrier reef further from the shore with a bigger and a deeper lagoon inside. So, you can see that between the reef and the island, there is a shallow lagoon, shallow kind of you can call it a lake, you can call it a pond, but the best word is a lagoon. And on the seaward side, there is sudden drop to the sea bottom. This is the barrier reef according to Darwin. This figure, figure 5.5, shows the formation of an atoll. Here you will see the dark portion, the dark brown is showing how with the arrows on it, is showing how the island has sunk, it subsided, and on top there is a shallow lagoon. No part of the original island can be seen on the top, and there is a circular reef which has formed with a shallow lagoon, which is called an atoll. The fundamental idea of subsidence as proposed by Darwin did not imply any sudden changes of level, but a gradual sinking of land, either by a continuous process or by stages. The rate of subsidence was supposed to be slower than the upward growth of corals. This is very important. If the subsidence and the upward growth of corals had happened at the same rate, there wouldn't be any fringing reef, there wouldn't be any barrier reef, there wouldn't be any atoll, because subsidence and growth of corals were happening at the same rate. But the rate of subsidence was much slower, and the corals were growing at a higher rate towards the surface. Otherwise, coral polyps would die if they were in deep water. So, coral polyps, as we've learned before, would die in deep water and would also die if they are out of water for a long time. According to this, the fringing reef, barrier reef and atolls are the three stages in the evolutionary growth of coral reefs. There are certain evidences in support of Darwin's theory. A, that the lagoons are shallow and which supports the idea that there was a gradual subsidence of land. If the land did not subside, the lagoons would be filled up with eroded red reef deposits. Everywhere, he noticed that the lagoons between the island or the reef or at the middle of the atolls remain shallow. B, there are no cliffs seen in most of the coral islands. Cliffs are found in those areas where the land is stationary or rising. This is one of the points very much which go for or in support of Darwin's theory, that Darwin was talking about a submergence in the process, and here if there are cliffs, either it's stationary or it is the land is emerging rather than submerging. C, parts of oceans which has emergent coastlines do not have any coral growth on them. This is also seen from all parts of the world that emergent coastlines will not have any coral growth. D, the islands which have atolls have very steep slopes on the seaward side, indicating subsidence and continuous reef building. E, the coral reefs are much thicker downward as they must have been formed on the subsiding platform of the island. All these 5 concepts are in support of Darwin. We'll find that there are other people also who feel that Darwin's concept, Darwin's theorizing is good. So, we have James Dwight Dana. He is a geologist. He basically provided evidence to prove Darwin's theory. Darwin's theory was more conceptual rather than providing evidence. There were other people, other scientists who believed in Darwin's theory, supported Darwin's theory and put forward their concepts and to support the theory. In 1838, Dana joined a United States exploring expedition to the South Seas with Charles Wilkes. His book on coral reefs and islands was published in 1853. You will find that Dana and Darwin are contemporaries, and Darwin had just in 1842 produced his theory of coral reef, the subsidence theory of coral reefs. So, Dana investigated coral islands in greater detail than anyone before him. He substantiated Darwin's observation that atolls were evidence of subsidence of the ocean bottom. Reef building corals, Dana independently concluded, lived only in shallow tropical waters or hard substratas, commonly forming fringing reef volcanic islands. Coral rock found at some depth on island flanks and atolls made only of reef rock indicated that extensive volcanic land had disappeared beneath the Pacific, leaving clusters of atolls to mark their former existence. This we've seen as we've studied coral reefs and their presence of atolls in different parts of the world, that the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean, northern part of the Indian Ocean in the Arabian Peninsula, there are clusters of atolls which signify that there has been subsidence of land. In 1896, 1897 and 1898, the Royal Society of London carried out drilling on Funafati Atoll in Tuvalu, one of the South Pacific islands which is a part of the Commonwealth. That is, it's part of the British, we are part of the Commonwealth, Canada is part of the Commonwealth. So, they are not under the British, it is an island which has its own governance, but it is part of the Commonwealth. Was for the purpose of investigating the formation of coral reefs to determine whether traces of shallow water organisms could be found at depth in the corals of Pacific atolls. Because by this time, the scholars and the scientists came to know that coral reefs would exist only in certain latitudinal zones of the world. This investigation followed the work on reefs conducted by Charles Darwin in the Pacific. The first expedition in 1896 was led by Professor William Johnson Solis of the University of Oxford. The geologists included Walter George Woolnough and Edgeworth David of the University of Sydney. Professor Edgeworth David led the expedition in 1897. The third expedition in 1898 was led by Alfred Edmund Fink. So you can find that in the 19th century, most of these, at that time, the Western world, and Western world, it's not really the Western world, but the educated English-speaking world, which had its universities in Australia, in United Kingdom, in the US, in Canada, they had their own groups of, because the study of corals became a very, very important topic in this part of the country, all begun by Charles Darwin. Then there were other theorists apart from Charles Darwin, several scholars who opposed the subsidence theory of Darwin and propounded theories of their own. So one of them is the standstill theory. These theories were called non-subsidence or standstill theories. These theories fall into two groups. Corals grew on stable platforms without any change in sea level. Reef building happened on wave-cut platforms when the sea level was lowered. So there were the standstill theory proponents talked about stable platforms which was not subsiding, and second group talked about reef building on wave-cut platforms when the sea level was lowered for some reason or the other. One of the main proponents of the standstill theory was Murray. He said the lagoon was formed due to solution, not because of laying down of sediments. Ryan wrote about reefs growing upward on still standing aggraded submarine banks. Guppy said that reef growth on rising landmass rather than on sinking landmass. Wharton felt that reef growth on truncated foundation, a foundation which was sliced off from the top. Agassiz, reef growth on subaerially eroded platforms. All these are very, very famous geologists in their own right, from the continent of Europe, from British Isles, from US, Canada and Australia. The entire, it happens at times when the entire scientific population starts talking about a particular topic. Then we have the glacial control theory, another very famous theory by Daly in 1915. He put forward a theory to explain the existence of coral reefs in various stages. This is known as the glacial control theory. All oceans were chilled during the Pleistocene glacial period. Over wide stretches of the tropical seas, the reef corals were exterminated or greatly weakened in the reef building power because sea levels had gone down during the glacial period. This is a diagram showing the glacial control theory. You can see for each of the pictures, first is the emergent island, second is the sea level is going down, third is because of the sea level gone down, the waves have created a wave-cut platform, and once more in the fourth, the sea level is rising after the glacial period, and reef is being created on the wave-cut platform. This is basically what Daly had talked about in the glacial control theory. Land masses or shoals have been defended by the pre-glacial living reefs. They were successfully attacked by the waves of the open ocean when the sea level had gone down. At the climax of glaciation, the waves of the tropical seas ran over surface lower than the present. First, because water has been removed from the ocean to form ice caps. Secondly, because ice caps were attracting remaining ocean water to itself and thus lowered the level of the seas within the tropics. The depth of the platforms cut and built by the waves during maximum glaciation was estimated to be 55 to 90 meters below the present sea level. Once more, with the late Pleistocene warming of air, the surface of water in the tropical seas grew warmer, ice caps melted, reef growing had begun once more. The warming of tropical seas allowed coral larvae and reef growing colonies to thrive on the outer edges of these new wave cut platforms. The fringing, barrier and atoll reefs were explained as shallow crowns recently built up on wave formed platforms and not as different stages as was mentioned by Darwin. Then we have Davis, who talks about the theory of coral reef formation. This is in the first decades of the 20th century. The 19th century, a lot of work has been done on theorizing on coral reefs. Davis began the study of coral reefs. He published many papers and his monumental major work was on the coral reef problem. But unfortunately, Davis did not propound any kind of any new theory. I mean, there were many people who tried to explain the coral reef problem in their own ways, many scientists did, but nobody attempted a holistic explanation. This was taken up by Davis. He gave a new orientation to the old problem. He gave importance to Darwin's subsidence theory with certain modification, especially in the context of marginal seas in the coral reef zones. Davis mostly tried to justify and rejuvenate Darwin's old theory. He did not postulate any new theory, but attempted to evaluate Darwin's theory in the context of the latest physiographical findings. Salient features of Davis's work: he gave a lot of importance to depth of embayed shorelines. Subsidence of the base of the reefs was the best explanation for drowned shorelines. Absence of cliffs for the protection of pre-existing reefs. According to the subsidence theory, and reef growing represented on sinking platforms were superimposed on the platforms. Davis cited the Great Barrier Reef along the western edge of Australia as an example of reef building on tectonically subsided land. Problem here is that the amount of subsidence in any reef growing area is not measurable. Davis advocated subsidence theory of Darwin, as I mentioned before. His objection to standstill theory was that there would be a major problem in the world of washing away of eroded reef and land material. And the eroded material would pile up against the lagoon. If the land under the lagoon gradually subsides, the eroded material would accumulate and yet the lagoon would remain below sea level. Thank you so much.